right, I'll go ahead and hit record, and that should be starting. You should get a notice that it starts. Thank you again for serving. I wanted to, I'm Janice Fox. I'm director for Middle Tennessee Grand Region, serving Upper Cumberland, South Central, and Mid Cumberland districts in Middle Tennessee. I will make a note. Our chair, Dr. Randy Boyd, he sends his regrets. He was not able. He had a conflict. Was ready to chair tonight, and then had a conflict and could not. Graciously, Dr. Anita Ricker is standing in. We've had scheduling hiccups because that's just what happens in the hectic month of December. So I'll be helping facilitate and support as usual, but may prime the pump a bit to help us get engaged, and then turn the floor over to you all to have lots of discussion. So I will go ahead and share my screen and start us off with our preamble, and then a couple of little logistic things we'll come back to before we hit roll call, and maybe a few others will come on. All right, just a thumbs up. Are you able to see the screen yet?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So the Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department wants to remind us of each of the following. Our conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended and approved by the General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged and focused on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in that new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspections pursuant of the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. So that is our preamble. So thank you for bearing with me again for that. We'll do that each time to help us kind of frame out that this is a new funding formula focused on student-based budgeting. I wanted to pause 2 seconds before we jump there and make sure we have where your items are coming in. So just to double check that you have a Google link that would be loaded in your calendar invite for these meetings. And then in each of those, you would see the meeting. So under the post-secondary, you would have each of the meeting and tonight's meeting materials. Those include several data pieces that will be helpful for you to dive into. In earlier sessions 1 and session 2, you had elevated some good questions and some requested resources that we have provided here. So a few resources for you to be able to dig into as it'll help support your thinking and planning. This time I will send this on over to Dr. Ricker and let you do our roll call for us and get a heads up on our agenda.
I think I've been watching as people logged on, so if Nicole is online, let me know. Andy Davis, has he joined us yet? And Mike Bell, has Mike joined? Okay, everybody else I think I've checked off, so
Perfect.
we can move on.
All right. I will make note that we do have a new committee member who have a new, and I don't see him just yet, so I'll check on him. But we have a state board. It was a recommendation from the governor for a state board of education member, Jordan Mollenhauer. So he may be joining us shortly, but he is new to our group, our committee. All right. Kind of guiding through. So let's take a step back and think about reviewing our meeting 2 and follow-ups. I thought we could think about, so the role that you play, strongly encouraging you that in between to engage with stakeholders, all the stakeholders that you might have available within your own networks, whether it be in where you work or your chamber, but soliciting as much feedback as possible on the recommendations and what you're hearing. And we've had brainstorming from our prior session too, several great ideas were coming out of your thinking there. So I wanted to pause to see, because there are no limitations on who you talk to and for how long, just soliciting that feedback. But I thought I would pause here and hand it back over to Anita to maybe what conversations have you been able to have? What solicitation of feedback?
Yeah, so has anybody talked to anybody new or reached out to anyone of anything you want to add from our previous conversation? Or if you missed meeting 2, maybe something you want to add that we captured or we didn't capture. So now's your time to turn on your mics and share openly, and then we're going to go back and try to summarize some of those from last time.
So this is Representative Brian Williams. I wasn't on the meeting last time, but I was accosted at Kroger by the director of schools, which is always a great challenge. And of course, I think one of the biggest challenges that there's a lot of fear and trepidation as it relates to what's going on behind the scenes. Of course, it doesn't seem to me, obviously these are the discussions that we're having, but there is a lot of discussion among stakeholders, school board members, directors of schools and such about their concerns about change altogether. And I think the more we can incorporate what discussions we're having, at least with our local stakeholders, I think would be extremely beneficial. Of course, there's this perception, which I appreciate the governor and staff doing this, but there's this perception that it's all already decided and things are happening in a vacuum. But I do think it's important for them. I think most of what they were saying was, we don't care what you do, just don't give us less money. I think it's really the consensus. But anyways, I thought I'd share with that since I wasn't here the last meeting.
So was there anything, I'm just curious, that they're really strongly adamant about keeping?
Yeah, I think one of there's a big discussion, particularly in my region. We've made great investments into career and technical education in our 1-2 year institutions, like Tennessee Promise kinds of things. But my region has not really had a big investment as it relates to high school for CTE outside of those areas. And so one of the things they're saying is, CTE is something that they're trying to do within their own forces or their own dollars. And so I think that was something that they were a little bit concerned about, and being able to continue to provide dual enrollment opportunities for kids, and particularly the ones that we that we collaborate with in counties around ours. Putnam County is kind of like the hub of the wheel. It's shaped just like the state of Tennessee, and 8 counties touch us just like the states touch Tennessee. And so people rely on us for healthcare and education and resources and things like that because they don't have the services that they normally do. So they just want to make sure that we're not impacting what their current plans are, that they'll be able to seamlessly transition into their current model, I guess you could say.
So if they had more CTE dollars, is what I hear you saying, they would be in favor of that?
Yeah, I obviously that's kind of the new push because of what the governor's doing with GIB and others. I think it's important that we do that. I think that's the main thing. They just want to be able to provide a broad cross section of different ideas or different areas of courses of study for students, because right now we're able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else?
Hey, it's Lisa Smithkoff. So I didn't get a whole lot of new information other than, reiterated some of the things we talked about. But one thing I did hear really clearly from at least one teacher was that we really need to include the universal pre-K option, not just for those, they usually have a small group at each school potentially, and there's usually more children they felt needed it. And they just thought that was really important that we include that as well. So I said I would share that information.
Okay.
Hi, this is Tracy Hall from Southwest. I team with Dr. Yolanda Jones, who is TCAT president, and she sent out to the 40 community and technical college presidents an email asking for feedback, and they may have responded in some other way, but one comment was that they believe that career and college counselors should be placed in each high school or school system to focus on post-secondary education and their work opportunities, as opposed to dividing their counseling time by testing and scheduling.
Okay.
So that was all.
I'm sure the teachers would appreciate that too, of getting to focus on something.
That's right.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Anyone else?
This is Chris Richards. I was at a gathering that included some political figures here in Shelby County, a school board member, and a number of teachers and educators who are very interested in what we're doing. And I got a lot of affirmation for the conversation we had the last time, where we talked about the importance of starting career basic education in middle school. They felt that the only way we're going to significantly change, at least in Shelby County, the problem that we have with disaffected young people is to take advantage of the opportunity that we have to provide education on workforce readiness, workforce opportunities. When I mentioned the virtual reality as a way to explore jobs, people were so excited. They said, if we could do that for our kids when they're in 7th grade and 8th grade and start showing them, what kind of opportunities are out there, it would help so much. So I think we need to put that on the must-haves from this subcommittee.
Yeah, I watched my 8-year-old grandson play in a robotics cell in the virtual reality over the weekend, and he completed 3 different levels and got his gold star, and he was so excited about it. But at the end of it, it asks you, is this a career you would be interested in? And he's talking to this guy in his head, like, he said, no, he said, I really still want to be a doctor. So I don't know that he really understands what a doctor is yet, but, again, he liked it. He thought it was fun, but he's got a bigger awareness now, and he's 8. So 2nd grade. So are they, do you think, Christine or Chris, that they wanted more of the career exploration side of it, or would they actually want the training side of it? Like, I've seen some middle schools start to incorporate the code bots and the robots and the coding, and almost getting into what would be high school level traditionally, but they're seemingly pushing it down.
I think they would like to have it, if they could have access to that, as well as the career readiness and career exploration. We're working in a void here, and they're very much supportive of all those things, because we have a tremendous number of disaffected young people between the ages of 16 and 24 who are not in school in any way, shape, or form, are not in the workforce, and they're not in the military here in Shelby County.
Would the training be during the school day, or would it be after the school day? Would there be, summer camps or after school camps that the colleges and the TCATs could provide, or is it more money in the school level?
The best scenario is to have it during the school day, because, especially as these kids get a little older, we can try to keep them in school. We have a problem as well with a lot of these kids. They, lose interest, and they don't have a supportive home life, and they, abandon the system and then are out there in the wind. And, just looking at our numbers from COVID, we're about 10,000 children fewer in our public school system right now than we were before COVID. And that's using the district's numbers. That's not my numbers.
I didn't realize it was that large, so that's...
Yeah. It's a significant reduction. And, you know, these kids could never log in. They never had the capability of logging in. They couldn't make it work. It wasn't that the district didn't provide them the laptop or the hotspot. I mean, they just didn't have the support. And you know, you can't give a laptop and a hotspot to a fourth grader and expect them to be able to figure it out themselves. So we had a lot of kids who had real problems with the virtual learning. So we're delighted they're back in school. That's a big improvement.
Got it. Okay, is there anyone else that shared something that maybe you confirm what we talked about, or you have a new idea that we didn't think about? Wish I had some Jeopardy music, you know, here to play. But as I told you earlier, I'm not singing, so we'll keep this going.
So this may be a good place to also weigh in on from our chairs meeting. So there was a chairs meeting, subcommittee chair and the commissioner. And one of the things that she noted was we've had a lot of the subcommittees request or to create a streamlined way to pose more surveys. So that will be coming your way. So we're working with TOS and to help pull in some of the questions that are coming from each of our groups and sending out that survey. So more to come there. Also, the batch of feedback and data, you should in that folder have about 200 survey feedback from across town halls. That should be dropped in soon. I'm sorry we've had a delay in codifying some of that. I think they've given up and we're going to have all of it at once. That way we can just begin to pull that and sort. But we'll move on in the agenda and you'll get to kind of sort through some of the big takeaways that are across that feedback. So we can move into our feedback section. So the next few slides, we'll walk through the summary of feedback that have been collected across those 8 town halls. We had our last one in the Upper Cumberland just last week. So that's completed. And then now they'll be engaging in the local side. So the conversation, that too has been, this is about our state funding portion, and I know very important to that is also what is the local side. So the town halls will begin in the next week or so. Those dates are being populated to have that conversation around the local funding. But moving to feedback that we've been able to summarize, I wanted to pull this forward and kick that over to Dr. Ricker. We can just toggle through each one and really, just as you all were doing, kind of frame out, do these feel right? This is the overall. This slide is the overall feedback that's been received. These feel like things that should go in that must have, and thinking about the base, remembering the base is for all students. What would all students need access to? And then we'll toggle through weights and direct funding, and it's really engaging conversation.
So I think the next slide is the base, correct?
It is.
Is there any way to make your slide larger or make it full screen, Janice?
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah, that's a little better. I can put my glasses on and back and forth, but...
Oh, I got you. There you go.
Okay, so as Janice said, the base is things that should be included for every student at a bare minimum. So here are some of the things, the resources that have been consistently named in public feedback from the town halls. And I think we've heard some of these things even in our conversations. So want to kind of look at those and then see if there's any feedback on that maybe we need to include something else. Definitely nurses, either at every school or a nationally recommended ratio, perhaps. I know in the school systems I'm in, most of them have their own nurse or they have rotating nurses that share 2 schools. So I'm not sure what happens if they shift in the morning to the afternoon. If you're sick in the morning and the nurse is at the other school, what happens? But that's one option. Counselors either at every school or at a nationally recommended ratio. And again, we mentioned earlier that the counselors focus on counseling as opposed to having testing duties and all the other things that they are responsible for. School psychologists at a nationally recommended ratio. Teacher salaries and benefits. Maybe that should also say at a nationally recommended ratio in that to raise our teacher pay salaries and benefits for what they do, and flexibility for facility funding and or deferred maintenance. So do you feel like that has kind of addressed most of the baseline needs, or is there something we left off?
The only thing I would add, I haven't seen the second slide. I guess my only question is that do they deal with transportation? I would assume transportation is a baseline category. Is it? I don't see it listed there. Is it in the next category, or am I missing something?
Right. No, this is, and I don't know that I know that for sure that would need to be a base, but that may not have been something that we've seen yet in our feedback. So for sure, the next one is on weighted values, which you might have transportation in two places. Thinking about what I heard you all say in prior feedback, I think your list, you mentioned work-based learning and exposures, and in a prior conversation, you mentioned having transportation that was provided so that it didn't impede opportunity for students to have that connection. So it could be that, to your point, Representative Williams, that it could be in the base. Obviously, all students, we need transportation to get them to school, but then might there be another direct or probably a direct service that would connect over to a specific transportation need to connect over to businesses or work-based learning opportunities or something.
That's what I was kind of alluding to. For instance, if you wanted to, in my district, if you wanted to go to Cookeville High School to get something that they didn't have at Upperman High School, we currently have people that are shuttling students, either a bus or a van, from one high school in the district to another high school in the district where those services are available for them.
That's a great point.
And that's also a great way to share resources when you're busing them to share resources. So that way they have the most opportunity and the most flexibility, but without that transportation, it would limit what they could do, especially in the rural communities, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
It may be
Anyone else?
It may be that you just, sorry to interrupt, but it may be just that you weighted the weight differently based upon the availability of that service. So it wouldn't necessarily be a base, because it may not be necessary to a school who already has that particular post-secondary development program at every school in their district.
Got it.
So wouldn't basic transportation, though, still be a base, and then the weighted transportation be the work-based learning or the busing between schools, and you've got the weight of rural communities there? Maybe that also helps that. Is that what the group is saying or not saying?
I think it can be either or both. I guess I'm trying to look at it through the sphere of post-secondary, but also look at it through the sphere of all education funding. So it's kind of, it's both, but for our purposes, I think it's the weighted version. But I think for the purposes of all education funding and wherever we get the final pyramid made, there should be a base in the standard curricular format.
And if you would go back to the base.
Happy to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I this is something that I would need to know in terms of what the counselors or the school psychologists, if they also serve as, I know at the college level, we have a social services coordinator. And so this person works to connect our students who may be experiencing homelessness or food insecurity. They work with those basic types of needs, because it's hard to come and learn if you're hungry or if your lights are out. And we also have an emergency fund for students if they run into a problem with a flat tire or something like that. $150 may not be a lot to some people, but it's a lot to a lot of people if you don't have it. And so those types of basic needs to help, that we call those wraparound support services. So maybe that's what the counselors do, a school psychologist, I don't know. But it would seem like that would be a base type of need that we look at, happens outside of the classroom, in their homes, in their neighborhoods. We have students that experience, and I'm sure that's a school psychologist, that those ACE, those adverse childhood experiences, and so how do they address all of those things that the kids bring to school with them that impact their learning?
I don't see anything in the base that includes just basic supplies, because I know a lot of times the school systems do not have money for textbooks. They share textbooks, or the teachers are buying things out of pocket. So to me, you show up to a class, you have basic supplies provided as well. Or I may be the only one that feels that way. So.
No, I agree with you. And you mean like per student, regardless of what school you're in, these are the basic supplies you should have, right? And define it by grade level, probably, right? You need different things at different grade levels.
My daughter teaches in a county elementary school, and that's kind of what I'm using that as a baseline. But they have a group classroom set of textbooks that they share. But they do not have workbooks. So if they have workbooks, that she needs, she's standing in a copier making copies of something. But at other school systems, they have the same textbook adopted, and each kid has their own workbook, and that's used every year. And then, next year they start over with brand new workbooks. So, but if they get workbooks at the school, a lot of times the school has funded that, not being considered a base funding, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm on the college side, but we would expect every student to show up with a book or an online text or something to be prepared for that class. But are we doing the same thing at the elementary school if a text is required? Maybe it's not, but in most cases, I think it is.
You have kind of touched a really sensitive point as a parent for me. This is a problem that's statewide. The modus operandi is that my parents would always say to me, well, where's your textbook for math, or where's your textbook for science? My kids only had a textbook out of 2 out of 5 to 7 classes, 2 to 3 out of 5 to 7 classes, and they had to check out a textbook to bring it home. Well, if every child has the same test day, not everyone gets a textbook. And so what ends up happening is we rely solely on electronic means. And what Chris was saying earlier is kids simply don't have the electronic means. So ends up kids don't have the resources they need. Now, I'm going to go back to the post-secondary thing. If we're doing post-secondary emphasis, then maybe in the special projects or something at the top of the list, in order to really commit to funding something, we should put the resources for that specific thing, which should include a textbook or a workbook or something that the kid has access to, and it has to be proven they have access to it.
Good point. Okay. Anyone else have base funding needs that you've heard about or you're thinking based upon your experience?
Yeah, hey, this is Lee Barfield. Can you hear me, Janice or Dr. Ryder? Yeah. Sorry, I missed the last meeting, but I have a question about the base there. It says teacher salaries and benefits. I'm asking a question about that I've heard a lot about. Is the quality of teachers. Is there some sort of base level of quality of teachers in the schools? Some minimum standard, or is it all localized? And what do you? It looks like the base ought to include quality teachers. That's probably assumed there, but I wonder what the thinking is on quality of teachers, quality of the teacher schools in the state that are delivering teachers to us. and to the system, where is that included in the funding issue?
Yeah, I think that would be really our thinking through what is the base salaries and then, making that competitive. The quality component to that, there's differentiated pay options from the local. I noticed that each district has differentiated pay options that are tied to some of those outcomes. But that is also something for this group to consider, is thinking through, so what would be competitive? I noticed we've mentioned that with nurses. It's hard to staff areas. We're often working to try to recruit them and for retention as well. But maybe our salaries are not competitive. So I think that would be a good conversation to think about what are some good competitive salaries that for our staff members. And then to your point on quality, there can also be differentiated for outcomes. I believe that was an area that we have. It's also in our other PowerPoint deck where it talked through outcomes. I skipped down a few. I can juggle back up because we've had base and weights, and then there would be direct. But then to your point on thinking about closing achievement gaps, and so some differentiated pay type ideas could be connected to the outcomes and how performances are meeting targets or some performance metrics.
Yeah, that's helpful. What I was really focusing on is, does the state have a minimum standard for all teachers to be, do they have to pass some bar examination like we have to pass in the lawyer world,
Mm-hmm.
or the medical exams? Do teachers have a state so that you can ensure there's teacher proficiency? I probably should know the answer to that, but I
They
don't.
do.
Yes, sir. And you've got several here on the committee who work with higher education, but for sure, some of the standards for praxis and licensure, yes. So yes, sir.
I think to your point, I think my daughter had to take 3 different praxis exams or something like that. So it didn't matter that she had a degree from ETSU, she still had to pass those exams. So that's a bare minimum that is a requirement. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, from what I've seen in our 10 counties that we serve, beyond that, how do you identify quality in teaching? A lot of systems have different metrics to measure that. So some are very hung up on TCAP scores, but yet didn't provide the resources to teach the materials, or so there is a lot of differentiation. I know I've seen in our 10 counties.
So is it a localized thing that the local school system decides whether to hire the teacher or not, so that the standards are different? There might be better teachers in this district than that district. Is that the way it works, or is there a minimum floor that every teacher that in the state system would have to meet those requirements, or is it localized?
I think there's a little bit of both. State requirements for sure to be licensed in Tennessee are standardized requirements, and as Dr. Ricker mentioned, passing exams and to meet licensure, but then also the local option for any differentiated pays, or you mentioned selection of teachers, recruitment, retention. They have that option as well for their own.
Yeah, I think to go a little bit further, early on in their teaching career, they're evaluated a couple times a year, and that can be repeated if there are issues identified by the principal. If you and I were to evaluate a person, we probably would still do it a little different. So even though there's metrics there, it's still somewhat different from school system to school system. But if I remember correctly, a teacher has to score a 3 to be a standard teacher, and then a 4 and a 5 is over and above. And I think you have to score a 5 to be a tenured teacher a couple, 3 years in a row, which is next to impossible. So tenured teachers sort of went away. Or that's my impression. So somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but.
I
That's
think you're
helpful
right.
to me. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can help a little here because to be a 3, the teacher's supposed to provide 1 year of learning growth for the year that they teach the student.
Correct.
Okay, and a 4 and a 5 provides more than a year, and then a 2 and a 1 fail to provide a year of growth at a level below that for the year that they teach the student. So in a situation like Shelby County, where they start with a significant number of students who are not performing at grade level, they're not expected to necessarily bring them up to grade level in a single year. If somebody's 2 years behind, if they get a year of growth, that's a good thing compared to maybe where they've been. So that's how it's supposed to work. When we did the conversion from a separate city to a county-wide system back in 2012, we put in place an incentive process that recognized outcomes, but unfortunately, that has largely gone by the wayside with the subsequent administration, and also because the testing program has been so erratic and people haven't been held to accountability on the testing outcome. You can have a really great teacher who's providing 2 years of growth for a year of teaching the student, and she's probably being compensated the same as the person who's only providing 6 months of growth, unfortunately. It would be great if we could put in place a outcomes-based incentive at the state level, but I don't think the local districts are going to be too happy with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure they would either. So, but I think the TCAP score overall enters into that evaluation at the end of the year, but that's not completely all it's based upon. So, okay, is there anything else? Do we need to back up, Janice, or did we jump? Are we at a good place, or we jumped a couple because of questions? So, do we need to circle back to anything on the weights?
Yeah, I will move back up. I think Mr. Representative Williams was also wanting to weigh in, or I just
I'm
don't.
sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I think the one of the challenges that you face a lot of times, though, is there's not a very good collaboration between the LEA and the institution of higher learning that's delivering education certificates. I think in Putnam County with Tennessee Tech students, we had a real difficulty when we could get kids to graduate with an education degree. They'd pass their exam and they'd come in, and so we had this probationary period for 3 years, and during that probationary period they were able to try to begin to solve some of those problems. But the classroom experience and coming from being a student teacher or a student into the classroom was very challenging, especially when we were constantly changing the outcomes-based formula at the LEA. But I do think one of the things that we did find is that when the LEA collaborates better with those that are delivering education certificates at institutions of higher learning, then those teachers come into the classroom and they're more proficient early on than those that are not. And so it was a real problem 14, 15, 16. And then after that, to Mr. Barfield's point, the problem is that we paused testing for alternate years. And so what ends up happening, we had these rolling 3-year averages with no real data for a period of 5 years that was consistent and reliable. And so one of the things that we try to do is try to say, listen, if there's problems with the test, that's great, but we've still got to test. We still have to know where we are at the end of the year, and we can't miss testing anymore, and we can't let kids know that this is not going to count, because all it does is hurts the teacher and helps the progress or the growth measurements, not just for the teacher in the classroom, but also for the student, because they're lagging behind because it doesn't really count for anything. And so I think it's really important that we collaborate all three of those things to make sure that the quality education that we're delivering is actually functional in the classroom, because it's very, very difficult to do that otherwise.
Thank you.
I have a question, and again, I'm learning because I'm in the higher ed space and not in K through 12. But one of the things that I've noticed, again, this is my third urban community college, third city, and one thing that I notice is that the students are very transient. And so I'm wondering, how do you, if you are a teacher and you have a child that's in your class 1 year and then they move to another school, how does that student, where is the consistency to make sure that the student is able to move forward and learn if with the families moving around? And I know this may be outside the bounds of this conversation, but I guess I'm real concerned about what happens outside of the home, outside of the school, that directly impacts student learning. And if kids are moving around, and I'll see kids, they've gone to this high school and that high school, how do you have consistent learning that way? Is there standardization from building to building? I just don't know how I don't know how you possibly can learn. I'm coming from a background where it started in kindergarten and you pretty much go all the way up through high school, and you know people along the way. And I see kids that are bouncing around, and I'm wondering how is learning taking place? How do you address that?
I can tell you what was in place in Shelby County. Our superintendent, 2 superintendents ago, recognizing that somewhere between 30 and 50% of the students relocate every year in the course of the year, imposed a consistent curriculum schedule across the entire district. But in theory, this was hard to do, but in theory, if a child moved between schools during the year, the new class would be teaching the same material that was at the same place in the course that was being taught in the school that they left. And that did make a noticeable improvement for some period of time. I cannot tell you how much they've been able to maintain that. But it's a real problem in Shelby County, because seriously, between 30 and 50% of our kids move every year during the year.
Every year. And I don't know how you learn like that as a child. And I know it's not the child's fault, if you will, but how do they ever really learn if they're moving all the time?
Yeah.
And then if a teacher is being held responsible and accountable for moving a child, it's like, how can you get your hands and around something like that?
Well, that goes back to consistent resources between schools, and then you have your counselors and your psychologists that can address some of those things as well.
Mm-hmm.
What happens on a related issue? This is Lee Barfield. One of the teachers that I've talked to about this is a high school English teacher at one of the big high schools here in Davidson County in Nashville, and he's new to the system this year. He says one of the biggest problems, it's related to the movement among schools that you mentioned, which is sounds like a very serious problem. But he said for him, the missing schools, the chronic absenteeism of students is just a huge problem. He has 30 kids in the class or something like that, and so many of them are chronically absent. How does he keep up? How does he get the children to keep up? How does he keep the class moving along in a consistent way? It seems like the mobility of the kids among schools, but even within the school, you can have problems with chronic absenteeism. No solution, just a problem.
Yeah, well, Mr. Barfield, I think the interesting thing is the legislature has reset some standards and given local education and principals the ability to be more forceful with their communications with parents as it relates to the necessity of their kids to be in school, sometimes even visiting the home in order to figure out if there's an issue with a school counselor other than that. I do think that the state board has also set minimum standards as it relates to, as a part of their outcomes-based formulas, to understand what the rubric is for each grade and what the expectation is for each school. So I think the variant really is not what's being taught, it's the pace in which it's being taught. And the goal was really to try to keep variance within a 3-week period. So if you had no one third grade classroom or 7th grade classroom was ever more than 3 weeks ahead of any other classroom in the LEA. So if they did have a transference, even in amongst the same LEA, that it would be negligible or manageable, at least from a teacher's perspective with that student. Now the challenge is if to this number of 30 to 50% in Shelby County just boggles the mind for me. I had not heard that. If those numbers are numbers that are within that local LEA, I mean, you are the 6th largest school system, I think, in America. And so when you take that into consideration, that is thousands of kids. And I don't know that there is a panacea or some kind of magic pill for that kind of transient behavior. And to change the whole system in order to do that would vacate the other million students across the state if you tried to change for that. So it's kind of it's a difficult situation. I think that one will have to continue to look at, but it is quite a huge challenge.
Well, and we need to look at, this is something I was talking with our district attorney about. This is a legislative matter, but apparently at some point in time, the legislature eliminated the state requirement that the truancy reports from districts be shared with the local district attorney. And the district attorney used to be able to work with the school system on some of these chronic situations, and now they're no longer provided access to that information. So it's really the school district working alone with parents to try to get the kids in school. And our biggest problem, quite frankly, is a lot of these kids don't show up until October. School starts in August and they don't show up until October. And so they already are 2 months behind when they hit the door.
Yeah, I think ironically that change in the legislature actually came out of Shelby County legislators.
Yeah. I think they didn't want it to have to be shared.
No, they absolutely didn't want it to happen because they didn't want the youth of that community to be introduced to a district attorney about something other than criminal capacities. And so I get why they didn't do that. And so in most districts across the state, the truancy officer is the vice principal and the school resource officer in a lot of cases. And so a school resource officer is a lot of times the one who's contacting the parent or doing the home visit. At least that's what it is in my district.
Yeah. And that's really where it should be. But if that isn't working, then you've got to see, is there some other way? I don't think we want to go chasing these kids, in a criminal sense, but I think you've got to do something to force some accountability if the kids just aren't in school. I mean, Shelby County last year they reported 95,000 kids in the district. This year they reported 85,000 kids in the district. I'm sure some of those kids went to homeschooling and I'm sure some of them are in private schools, but it does cause one to wonder what happened to those kids.
Yeah, we got a question in the chat for defining LEA, and I would say Local Education Association, but I'm not 100% sure I'm right. So what's LEA?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's a government acronym for your local school system.
Okay, LEA. That's what I thought it was, but somebody else asked, and I wanted to define it just to make sure.
So Shelby County had like 10
Janet said it. So, yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was a non-educator. Just wanted to make sure.
No, good question. Good question. All right, we've got a slide here on additional dollars, and these areas received the most positive feedback. You see on the screen there, financial literacy, middle school CTE, innovative high schools, extended school year, RTI, high dosage tutoring, and they want us to provide, which one of these bullets we feel like we could support, or if we would add or change or have any other considerations on these particular topics. And some examples of existing funding that will be applied to this category would be like ACT retake, 4 dual credit courses, summer programming, etc. So I guess, is there any of those we should take off? First
What is
question.
high dosage tutoring? I'm for it. I think I'm for low dosage tutoring too.
Yeah, so high dosage tutoring connects over to a strategy we currently have in place, would help us accelerate learning. So high dosage tutoring could be during the school day, after the school day, but really maximizing students to really get to that gap that may be missed, or to tier 1. So it's not necessarily a skill based, but it's the core instruction and accelerating learning. So
Isn't it more targeted based upon the kid's ability also?
that would be your RTI. So in our state RTI squared, that would be more of the skill that may be missed. But for the high dosage tutoring, it really could be just a portion of the standard that you didn't get. That's just pretty natural. But during recovery from COVID and such, it's really important.
We funded some additional high dosage type tutoring for this summer, and so I'm intrigued to know if those dollars were consumed, what the return on investment was. I think high dosage tutoring is an area where I think we could provide additional pay to teachers for after hours learning to catch kids up as they identify their own students who are struggling, where we could pay them after hours tutoring for kids that they've recognized and that they would qualify. I think those are some really good ideas. I do have a little bit of concern about the dual credit courses. It's not real. If we really need a truth in lending statement, I guess, in the banking world for that, it seems like most kids, it's not really free. The dual course credits, I noticed that and that not being free for kids as it relates to that stipend with 1 and 2 year institutions means that it's really an impediment to that pathway for those working families who can't come up with $50 or $150 for those dual course credits. And if we're really going to provide a kid with the opportunity, or child with the opportunity to take a dual credit, then we should pay for it. And if it means only doing two and it's paid for every child, then we should do it. But it's kind of a misnomer. Our family uses dual credit courses, but we get bills every year. And so there are kids that they get those bills and they just drop the course. That's ends up what they're doing because they don't have the ability to pay.
So to connect it back to this discussion, that would be connecting it with an additional dollar, or so make sure I capture it. So to your point, ensuring that we have resources for that. We don't have a cost idea yet, but just that it's a must have in this category for direct funding. Oops, you're on mute.
Sorry, I would argue that it is a requirement, and so much so that I think skin in the game is worth something as it relates to an ACT retake. I know a lot of kids take them because they're free, not because they have a plan or purpose. I used to lead a Bible study, and if I charged people $5 for a $25 book, they do it. But if I gave them the Devo for the devotional book for free, they never showed, ever. And so I think it's good to give a child a 1 ACT a year, but to retake it a second time, it has to cost them something. It'll make them study and do some ACT prep, in my opinion. And I won't talk as much.
That's perfect.
Hey, Ryan Williams, I second you on that. That's my experience as well. That's a good idea.
We have done the same thing. If I have a free lunch, it's hard to get people to show up, but if they paid $5 for the lunch, we still lose money on it, but they'll show up. So maybe we can reduce it to where there's not much invested, or provide some discretionary funds where school systems know when the kids don't have the money, I guess is what I would say.
What is RTI?
Right.
Jan, you.
Oh, yeah.
What?
So yeah, so the response to instruction, that is skills based, but to I think your conversation earlier, diving in to help support gaps, and that is intervention and instruction. So it's intervention.
Thank you.
I said I wasn't going to talk anymore, but I forgot about one thing. The biggest challenge as an employer I have is that the kids that I have are graduating from college, they can't talk to people. How do we fix that? I mean, their heads are constantly in a text message or an email. All the learning today is basically online, and particularly for the higher learners. And so, you know, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if there's programs out there, but you know, you can always tell a kid that's in 4-H or in FFA or in some kind of after school program, because they can carry on a conversation with you. They can look you in the eye. They know how to communicate just basic about the weather. And my big fear is that we've completely lost the ability for kids to carry a conversation at a lunch meeting or an investor meeting or whatever. And so I don't know how you inculcate that into additional dollars, but someone has to have found a system out there that works. Soft skills I never heard of until I became a legislator, and now it's like every employer I talk to in my district, they're concerned about the young people coming in and their ability to communicate. So I don't know what that is, but I think it's incumbent upon us to have a discussion about it.
Couple things I'll throw out there. Your Bring Your A Game to Work is a good soft skills program. And you can teach work ethic, is what I've heard from that curriculum and from that material. So I think that's one possible program that could be adopted. And the second thing, the Ron Clark Academy in Atlanta, Georgia, has like a competition, for lack of a better explanation. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's almost like a speed dating conversation that they introduce themselves and they're interviewed by business leaders, and then they compete to go to this national competition in Atlanta. And I've seen some schools do that, and I've seen some kids that were very backward, very shy, very much not considered the talkative one, really come out of their shell and get those good communication skills that they really need. So don't know if that's something how you would summarize that for additional dollars, but
Well, that's actually a good segue. Go ahead, Tracy.
I was going to say, I think the balance, being an educator for almost 30 years, and one of the things we tend to do is the pendulum will swing either one way, where we focus only on, workforce, and we talk about training, and then we don't talk enough about the so-called soft skills or the foundational skills that you will learn in the liberal arts type of curriculum, where it's speech and music and all of the humanities and arts. And that's what we do when we shift to one side and not understand that there is a balance in education. So when we are educating students, it's to be citizens of the world. So it's to get a job, but it's also to be able to communicate on that job. And so when we have speech and mass comm, and I say that in bias as a former speech teacher, there's a reason for that. And group work that we do in our classes, there's a reason for that. There's a reason for taking a literature class and understanding literature and the arts. There's a reason for that, because you're creating educated citizens. So you can be in a trade, but know and understand Degas in art, right? And know, because you're creating an educated citizen. And so I think that's one of my frustrations, is that we tend to, in everything, we swing one way or another, and it's about balance. And so we hear that so often students don't know how to do this and they don't know how to communicate, and that's what we try to work with them on. And even if you have to contextualize a speech class for an automotive class, so that automotive technician will know how to communicate with customers. That's what you have to do. That's what we do to educate our students. And so, and then when we talk at the community college level, it's not one, the transfer or the career in tech. It's both. It's both. And when we go too far one way, we're going to find that these are the types of things that we have. Students are not well-rounded. They know how to do one thing, but they don't know how to live and be citizens. And that's what we try to teach them.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, I want to be
Yeah,
cognizant of everybody's time, and it's 7:01 or 2, something like that. So, Janice, what do we need to finish up to wrap up on time? And then if we have some extra time that people want to hang around, that's okay.
That's right. So I will do a quick recap. Thankfully, we have everything recorded, so notes are captured there. But just thinking about sorting and getting a little more granular and prioritizing in those must-haves, I heard you say for the base, that would be a must-have. Career and college counselors, like one in each school. Career exploration would be a part of that conversation. And that's critical. Also heard related to counselors would be maybe a counselor that's for sure related to college and career, but then for those home services and the basic needs that also deal with wraparound services. So that might be also called a social worker, but just differentiating between two types of counselors that I heard you talk through. Then transportation, how critical that is in the base, but then wondering also, might that be in the base, a calculation or a weighted value for services that help move between services in a district. So some of that, got those notes. And instructional supplies, thinking about ensuring access to materials equitably regardless of the school. So in the base there as well. And soft skills, I think that would connect back over in the humanities. The things that you were just discussing would connect back over to the counselors. And not sure I have a total weighted value for that, but that's a good start. And I will get these memorialized and send that over to Dr. Ricker so she can also weigh in, say, yes, that's what we heard, and put those in those buckets for must-haves and should-haves in those per categories, helping us begin to maybe those building blocks, like what are the building blocks for the base and what are the building blocks for weights to literally create that idea for our budget.
I didn't say much, but I would weigh in on the soft skills, and say absolutely. And the sad part is that anyone who can communicate now is head and shoulders above anyone else, right? That you experience. And how do you get things done? Regardless of the business, it's working with other people, right? In rare instances, do you have solely an individual contributor focused on data all day, every day, right?
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely right. So
if I could just add on to that, because I know you all talked about the soft skills and communication, and I think that is also important when we're talking about these work-related behaviors, is just general accountability and coming to work on time and those kind of things. So somehow we build that all together, because I can tell you that I have college graduates with 4-year degrees, and I think I mentioned that before. I'm giving them their very first job they've ever had in healthcare as a nurse, a registered nurse, licensed professional, and they don't understand the concept of why it's important to come to work on time. So, but I think that would apply to anybody who's working in any job directly out of high school. 4 years later, when you go to school, you have to be an accountable human. That's citizenship stuff we were talking about.
I like that. Well, we've definitely listed a lot of good notes here, and we will continue to revisit the list. You have more coming to you to kind of sort through and refine. I'll pull forward our next meeting. We have a little bit of time to do that because it'll be a lot, so that'll be helpful. But we will meet here on January 4th, same place, same time. And I thank you for your work and engagement and great conversation.
Merry
Thank you,
Christmas.
Vince.
Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas. Happy New Year. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.